Hi everybody, my name is Eva Green Wilson, and today I'm here to share some information with you that will help you create lesson plans and activities for Trinidad and Tobago Week for Kids and Culture Camp. So first I'll tell you a little bit about myself, and then I'll go into more about the country and give you some interesting resources, fun activities, and some starting points for your research so that you can have a fun and informative week with your campers. I'll give you information about the history, the demographics, geography, food, cultural festivals and events, the animals that are there, industry, music, national symbols, things like that, and some interesting sites around Trinidad and Tobago to get some discussion going. Some more about me. Again, my name is Eva. I'm a mom to 3 former Kids and Culture Camp campers. I was also an assistant teacher and a teacher for several years. It was an honor and a privilege and a joy to work with so many campers and to be part of the community and contribute to the cultural education for so many kids for the past few years. I'm a graduate of North Carolina A&T State University, Aggie Pride, and more recently, I'm a graduate of Howard University School of Law. I still haven't taken my bar exam yet, but it's coming. You know, I'm a parent, so I've got a lot of stuff going on. So hopefully I'll get that done very, very soon. I've been a blogger and an advocate in the Caribbean community here in Washington, D.C. since about 2011 when I started my award-winning blog. Hopefully some of you guys have heard of it. It's called SocaMom.com. And I've worked on children's programs in the area with the Institute of Caribbean Studies. I've spoken internationally about education and literacy. I've also written a children's book that is set in Jamaica, Trinidad, and New York. It's called Anansi's Family Reunion. Some of the kids received that when we did Jamaica Week. During Caribbean American Heritage Month, Caribbean American Heritage Month, I hosted the Anansi Festival, which is a children's festival in Washington, D.C. that focuses on folk tales, Caribbean stories, and literacy. I also appeared on several local news stations to discuss Caribbean American Heritage Month and share craft projects, food, snacks, things like that. I'll include links to the videos that can be found on my YouTube channel and on my website that'll help you get started with your lesson planning. On my blog, I share resources that I've created to help parents and teachers teach kids about Caribbean culture. It includes videos, coloring sheets, and printable worksheets. So I'll make sure that I share links to that. I was not born in Trinidad and Tobago, but I was actually born here in Washington, D.C. I was raised in pretty much South Carolina. My parents came here from Trinidad and Tobago via England to go to school at Howard University and had my brother and I. My mom is from Trinidad and my dad is from Tobago. So the country is made up of 2 islands, but it's one country. The islands are very different from each other, and we'll talk about that a little later on. Most of my family is still in Trinidad and Tobago, or really elsewhere in the world. There's not too many of us who are here in the United States. I believe people in Trinidad and Tobago travel a lot because it seems like everywhere you go, you can meet a Trini. I would not be shocked if every single person watching this video knows at least one person from Trinidad and Tobago. Now we can go ahead and get started. This is just a video, so of course you can't ask me questions and go back and forth, but I hope that I'll give you as much information as possible. And if nothing else, this will serve as a starting point for your research and help you guide your planning and programming for the week. So first we'll talk about history in Trinidad and Tobago, and then we'll go on to the geography and current demographics. After that, I'll talk about the currency, the food, events, and holidays. Those kind of go together. You know, we all tend to eat around the holidays. Industry, what the country produces, and then finally I'll share some interesting sites, historical and popular figures from Trinidad and Tobago so the kids can maybe identify with people that they know. Along the way, I'll share some things from my personal experience. So this should take about an hour. Hopefully it won't take that long, but I really hope that it's helpful to you in your planning process. So let's go ahead and get started with the history. When you're looking up videos, since slavery and colonization was a part of the history of Trinidad and Tobago, you need to check it for possibly upsetting images for young campers. So just be sure that you've gone through and checked on that. So Trinidad and Tobago was not always one country. People have inhabited these islands for more than 7,000 years. So the first people were believed to come from the area now known as Venezuela. The first people that we know of did not leave ceramics behind. They were a pre-ceramic people. So the next set of people, about 500 BC, they left pottery and ceramics behind, and they were called the Saladoid people. They are believed to have come from South America around 500 BC, also from the area known as Venezuela. You can actually see Venezuela from certain points in Trinidad, so it kind of makes sense that if people were moving from a mainland area, that they would be coming from the Venezuela area. The early people spoke the language of the Arawaks, and eventually the islands were settled by two tribes of indigenous people, the Caribs and the Arawaks. There's a few of them still on the island today. So there's lots of people who claim to have ancestry from some of these original people, but for the most part, the population is very, very small, and most people's background is from slaves from Africa or indentured servants that came from India and China. There's a very small population of the original people. They live in tight-knit communities, usually up in the mountains. We'll get more into that later. So a familiar name, Christopher Columbus, comes up when you discuss colonization of the islands. The kids have likely heard of Christopher Columbus, so they might be excited to hear his name in connection with Trinidad and Tobago. He explored the islands on a later trip to the area in 1498. I know they're used to hearing 1492, but several years later he was on a trip and explored the larger island of Trinidad. It was colonized by the Spanish for the most part until 1800, but Tobago was colonized by the British, Dutch, French, Duchy of Courland, which is in modern-day Latvia. I know we don't talk a lot about Latvian explorers, but it actually is a thing. So that might be something that is interesting for you to share with your campers. You may want to create a timeline for the older campers so they can see how colonization happened and the different countries that kind of took up residence in Trinidad and in Tobago. It's also an opportunity to highlight the Carib resistance to settlement. Eventually, both islands were claimed by the British, and there's several forts in Trinidad and Tobago with cannons and all these breathtaking views of the ocean. Each has its own history, and I've been able to visit them with my kids. I visited them when I was a kid and then with my children. And I was the one that was reading the plaques and getting the history, but the kids were content to sit on the giant cannons. That's what most kids do when they visit these forts, and then they run around because it's these large open areas. But it's really interesting to learn about, especially if you're a history buff. And considering how small Tobago is, it has a lot of forts. It's only 25 miles long and about 7 miles wide. And in that small space, they have Fort Milford, Fort King George, and Fort James. And they're all about 30 minutes apart if you're driving. So for example, I drive about 28 miles on a good day to take my daughter to gymnastics, and that takes about an hour. So if you were to drive the island from end to end, it takes about an hour and a half. It doesn't seem like it should take that long because of the distance, but when we start talking about the terrain and things like that, that should be able to explain some of the reason that it takes so long. Okay, so now let's get back to the forts. Trinidad, the larger island, has Fort Abercrombie and Fort George. So it's funny that the larger island has less forts than the smaller one, but you know, we'll talk more about that a little when we get into sites and attractions. So slavery is a big part of the history of Trinidad and Tobago, as it is for a lot of North and South America. By about 1800, approximately half or more of the population of Trinidad and Tobago was slaves. A little over a quarter of the population was free blacks and people of color, and just about 1,000 or so indigenous people. So even back then, there weren't too many people left. African slaves came to Trinidad and Tobago from the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade, all the way through the abolition of slavery in the Caribbean in 1833. They also came as indentured servants from China, India, Portugal, and Africa. and they continued to travel to the islands for work well into the 20th century and to settle there. Many scholars and people of the time felt that indentured servitude, as it was practiced in Trinidad, was just another form of slavery. So during that time, sugarcane and cocoa were the main crops that you needed labor for. Plantation owners were really desperate to keep workers because there's a lot of money that came from the sugarcane and the cocoa. So they'd often use means that were kind of unethical to keep the workers. Sometimes they wouldn't honor the contracts. Sometimes they would extend them for a decade or more. And I'll include a link to a video on reparations and things like that that might be good for older campers. So now we'll talk about the war and the independence of the country. So in 1941, the United States actually had an air base in Trinidad. It's called Waller Air Force Base. It was built in 1941 during World War II in response to Nazi U-boats that were kind of in the water along the coastline, just kind of lurking. So in cooperation with other bases on neighboring islands, Waller became a hub that was used to get aircraft from North and South America to North Africa and then to England. So it became a really important part of the fight against the Nazis. Trinidad and Tobago, as we talked about, was colonized by the British, and it gained independence in 1962. It had its own civil rights movement in the late 60s and early 70s, and it's really interesting to study on your own. You might just want to know that outside of what you learn for camp. And there's a movie that I saw a few years ago called 70, Remembering a Revolution, and it's a really, really great movie. There's some thought-provoking parallels to the Black Power and civil rights movements here in the United States, but it's particularly interesting considering that people of color were the majority in Trinidad and Tobago. There's very few, it's like, what are you fighting against? So that was an interesting thing. The prime minister, the very first one, was Eric Williams, very important figure, and he wrote a book on the history of Trinidad and Tobago. So he was the prime minister while it was, Trinidad and Tobago, and then while it was also the Republic. When you get a chance, try to look up 70, Remembering a Revolution. I watched it with my family. It's not too traumatizing. It's actually really good. It's a really great part of the history and really interesting part of the history to learn about. There's a whole lot to learn when it comes to the history of Trinidad and Tobago. I remember my dad, when I was growing up, he had a book on the shelf called The History of the Islands of Trinidad and Tobago, and it only went through 1900. And it was this huge book, right? So I probably have it around here somewhere now, but it seems like it's a really small place, but the history is just as expansive as the histories of other countries, including the United States. So it takes years to learn and digest, and you can take parts of it and summarize it so that your campers can get a rough idea. But realistically, you only have a week to teach them about Trinidad and Tobago, including food and music and everything else. And then it's in the middle of camp activities like, going outside and playing basketball and eating lunch and snacks and everything like that. So, I've given you just enough to get started and some keywords to do a little bit of research on your own. So now we can go into some national facts and some geography. The flag. Whenever I would start teaching about a country, I'd always start with the flag. It's always a good activity when the kids are first coming in to get them coloring or something like that. So I'll include a link to a coloring page that I use for Trinidad and Tobago. The flag is red, white, and black. It's mostly red with a white stripe down, like going diagonally across it, and it's got a black stripe kind of in the middle of that. So it begins in the top left corner and ends in the bottom right corner. The flag was chosen in 1962 by the Independence Committee. You'll remember that 1962 was the year that they got independence. So the capital is Port of Spain. It's located in the northwest area of the larger island of Trinidad. It's not the largest city, it's just the capital city. The largest city is Chaguanas. The national language, the official language, is English. It is spoken with an accent, so some people might think it's another language, but it's not. And each area of the country has its own inflections and accent that kind of signals to the locals what part of the country that you're from. The population of the country is estimated at 1.3 million. So that's pretty large population. As far as transportation goes, they drive cars like everybody else, and they drive on the left side of the road with the steering wheel on the right. So that takes some getting used to, but it's like England and a lot of European countries. There are 2 airports. There's Piarco in Trinidad and A&R Robinson in Tobago. Some people think it's A&R Robinson, but it's A&R Robinson in Tobago. And the airport's named after the Prime Minister. He was the 3rd Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, and he was actually born in Tobago. There's also a ferry that takes passengers and cars back and forth between Trinidad and Tobago. I've been on the ferry before. It is huge. There's a giant movie screen. They've got all these seats lined up. They've got, places to eat. There's a large cargo and holding area underneath for cars and other cargo. Trinidad and Tobago owns Caribbean Airlines. It's a large airline that serves all of the Caribbean. The leadership right now is, the president is Paula Mae Weeks. She right now makes Trinidad and Tobago the only country in Latin America and the Caribbean to have a woman president. There are several other countries, St. Martin, Aruba, that have women as prime ministers, but not as president. In 2010, Trinidad and Tobago elected its first female prime minister, Kamala Prasad. The prime minister right now is Keith Rowley. The national motto is "Together we aspire, together we achieve." And the national anthem, I'll play a little bit of the national anthem. The author happens to have been born in Guyana, which is interesting, but wrote the national anthem lyrics and music for Trinidad and Tobago. Okay, so the national bird, there's 2 national birds. It's funny, one in Trinidad and one in Tobago. The one in Trinidad is the scarlet ibis, and in Tobago it's the cocrico. The hummingbird is a special bird to the country because of its connection to the indigenous people, but it isn't an official national bird. The coat of arms for Trinidad and Tobago features all 3 birds, as well as 3 ships that Christopher Columbus sailed. So they kind of put everything together. The national flower is the chiconia, and it's an indigenous flower that blooms on or around August 31st, which is really neat because that is Independence Day in Trinidad and Tobago. So it's kind of like the flower is celebrating Independence Day in Trinidad and Tobago. The location, now let's talk about where it is. That's something that I used to start with my campers, to show them on a big map where the country we're studying is. So it's technically in North America, specifically the Caribbean, and which is also known as the West Indies. I always found that it was interesting that Trinidad and Tobago are included in North America and not South America, since it sits so close to Venezuela. Like, you can see it on a clear day from Trinidad. Technically, because it's on the continental shelf with South America, it is part of South America, but we all still consider it part of North America. Trinidad and Tobago are the southernmost islands to be included as part of the Caribbean, and since it's one of the more well-known countries, people like to compare it to Jamaica. The 2 countries are not necessarily near each other. They're kind of on opposite ends of the region. Trinidad and Tobago is in the Eastern Caribbean, and Jamaica is in the West. Like I said before, Trinidad has a population of 1.3 million and an area of nearly 2,000 square miles. Jamaica has a population of 3 million and is over 4,000 square miles. So they're very different in size and population. In American terms, Trinidad is about the size of Delaware. Now, Delaware is the 2nd smallest state in the United States. So that should tell you about how small Trinidad is in the grand scheme of things. So now we'll talk about the topography and the climate. The island is a mix of mountains and plains. So the flatter areas are in the center of the country and towards the south. And along the top, you have the mountains where you'll have the beautiful beaches and the waterfalls and things like that. And the mountains kind of extend in the north on up to Tobago, which has a spine of mountains that run down the center of the island. So again, there's beautiful waterfalls because of the mountains, and you can hike to them. There's some really beautiful beaches that you can hike to. Some just seem to show up after you hike through the woods for a while. I remember taking a truck, like we all rode in the back of a truck to a place where we hiked for several miles before we kind of slid down this embankment. I don't know what it was. It was on a dirt or something, but we ended up like right at this beautiful beach all of a sudden. I was 16 and super miserable, but when we got there, it was beautiful. It was totally worth the ride in the back of a truck and the hike. To get back, we had gotten on a fisherman's boat, and the truck met us at another spot so we wouldn't have to hike back through the woods with wet clothes and everything. But there were waterfalls and snakes, but it's a really beautiful place to see and experience. The cities are very built up, just like any other cities, but there's also a lot of untouched areas and unspoiled areas. The homes are usually made of concrete and cinder block. That's also one of the industries in Trinidad, and the houses are sometimes elevated with the cars parked underneath the house so that it can withstand rains and high winds and flooding. Trinidad and Tobago isn't usually hit by hurricanes and things like that. It's very few and far between, but there can be some rough weather and severe flooding at times. Just a couple years ago, there was a really bad flood. The weather is mild. It doesn't get painfully hot. Trinidad and Tobago is really close to the equator, so you'd expect it to be very warm, but it's not too bad. There are only two seasons: the wet or rainy season, that's June through December, and the dry season, that's kind of January to May. So now we'll talk about the demographics. People from Trinidad and Tobago are called Trinidadians, Trinbagonians, Tobagonians, or Trinis. So Trini is kind of like the casual word, but most people say Trinidadians and to cover everybody. There's slightly more people of East Indian descent from India than of African descent. It's about 35% versus 36%. A quarter of the population identifies as being of mixed ethnicity. There are also Chinese, Arab, and indigenous people who make up less than 1% of the population. Less than 1% of the population identifies as European or white. The population is estimated, again, you all should know this, 1.3 million, which is about the same as the population of Dallas, Texas, or San Diego, California. So imagine the entire country has the population of one of our larger cities. So the currency used in Trinidad, many places accept the US dollar, like all over the world, but it's easier to use a TT dollar or what's called a Trinidad and Tobago dollar. The conversion rate is about 7-to-1, meaning that it'll take 7 TT dollars to make up 1 US dollar. So kids who haven't thought about exchange rates might be fascinated to know that a $5 meal from KFC, for example, is actually $35 in TT dollars. So my kids were always in awe of the prices. Like we'd go to the mall and my daughter came running out of a store to tell me that, oh my gosh, in Trinidad, Barbies are like $100. So she was completely freaked out, and she was pretty young at the time. So it wasn't easy to explain to her that TT dollars and US dollars weren't exactly the same. So if you can get to a currency exchange like Treasure Trove, here it's on G Street in Northwest, if you can get to a place like that, you may be able to get some TT dollars. You can get 7 of them for $1 pretty much. Some TT dollars to show your class. You can just call ahead and let them know what you're looking for, and they may have some on hand or let you know when they'll have it. Some people will tell you that the best thing about Trinidad and Tobago is the food. I love a lot of things about the country, but it often comes right back to food. I do enjoy eating. I love the beach and the food you get at the beach. I love the festivals and events and the food you get at the festivals and events, like snow cone and popular street foods like doubles. I love visiting my family, and so you can probably see a pattern here. You get good food at your family's house. So I'll break down what the kids usually eat by meals and by snacks. So for breakfast, there's usually some sort of staple food like bake or a hot cereal like porridge, which is more similar to cream of wheat than oatmeal as far as the consistency goes. It's usually made with bay leaf and sweetened with condensed milk, sugar, something like that. Bake is a type of bread that can be mixed quickly and either put in the oven or fried. It's funny you say it's baked, but it can be baked or fried. My favorite type of bake is called float. And that's fried. So everybody makes bake differently. People tend to be very loyal to the type of bake they grew up having. The bake that my dad made for breakfast when I was growing up was more dense and filling, but they were smaller. When he would give it to us, he'd give it to us with like some preserved fish, like a smoked herring. I didn't like that, but sardines or some other preserved fish. Saltfish is something that a lot of people eat with bake. It's salted cod that is rinsed and boiled and seasoned and then mixed together with onions, hot peppers, sometimes tomato. It just depends on what you like. You'll see a lot of preserved meats because not everyone had refrigeration, so things will be preserved with salt and by drying. So around here you can buy saltfish at a place like Restaurant Depot near the Fresh Fish, but it's not something that you usually find like in a regular grocery store. With the bake, you can also have avocado, cheese, marmalade, some sort of preserves with the bake. You can have fruit because a lot of people grow fruit in their backyards like mango or papaya, pawpaw, guava, soursop. Avocado is a really great breakfast food. It's very different from what you buy here in the store. Here, the avocados are small and kind of blackish, maybe a dark green. And they're usually imported from Mexico, but they're light green and they're big like this. I mean, it's amazing and they taste completely different. So to drink at breakfast, you usually have Ovaltine or Milo or something called cocoa tea, which is shaved from a block of cocoa and cooked with the milk. And so not a tea at all, but it's called cocoa tea. There's a video that I'll send the link to my kids trying the different types of kind of chocolate milk drinks that you can have in Trinidad. Another thing you can have for breakfast is doubles, which is really, really good. That's a street food. I think I talked about it a little bit earlier, but you get that from a cart, and they have it's a bread called bara, and then it has how can I explain it? It has a filling that's like chickpeas, and it can be very hot or mild. And you can add your own pepper to it, or you can ask them for slight pepper that's kind of medium. But I also have a worksheet on doubles that you can use with the younger kids. It's called D is for doubles. That's on my website. I'll share that with you as well. So if you can get doubles for breakfast, or really any time of day, you should try to get it. It's really, really good. And you'll find out what doubles man you like the best, So that's pretty much it for breakfast, and of course cereal like anybody else. But if you could have the ideal lunch in Trinidad, it would probably be curry chicken or stewed chicken with rice and peas, maybe a salad, possibly callaloo and rice. Stewed chicken is not the same as chicken stew. It's chicken that's browned with burnt sugar. Some kids don't like callaloo the same way the kids here don't like Brussels sprouts and spinach and stuff like that. So it's made from a plant called dasheen. Sometimes it has okra, coconut milk, and seasonings, and it's kind of blended up and like super slimy. So some kids don't like it. I love it. I didn't like it when I was a kid. But each family might make it differently because of tradition or cultural differences. Some people add crab, some people add saltfish, sometimes it's strictly vegetarian. Cheese sandwich is also another popular option. It's made of a cheese spread kind of that's similar to pimento cheese here, but maybe not as sweet. But just like in the United States, there's hundreds of different lunch options. Just as many in Trinidad and Tobago as there are in the United States. Soda and sweet carbonated drinks are popular, just like here. And there are actually bottling plants on the island for local drinks like Solo and Chubby. You can actually buy those here. We've gotten Chubbies at the local grocery store, the regular grocery store. Solo, I think you have to go to the Caribbean market to get it. My kids really love them. They're usually very brightly colored and very sweet. So if you're trying to stay away from sugar or food coloring, it's not the route to go. So Solo you can get at the Caribbean market. Kids' favorites are usually Apple J or Red Solo. The same way that American households keep Kool-Aid or lemonade or iced tea in the refrigerator in a pitcher, some Trinidadian homes will have something called Mauby. Mauby is a drink made from a bark. It's in a syrup form. The syrup is then diluted with water. Some people add sugar and other ingredients to kind of make it their own. It has a licorice taste. It's kind of an acquired taste. I'm not a fan, but I know some people will really, really love it. Coconut water is popular and fairly easy to get on the roadside. You can get someone to take a cutlass, also known as a machete, cut the top off of the coconut, and just put a straw in it, and you drink it like that. So you can do that. A great dinner in Trinidad, to me, would be curry goat and rice, like rice and peas, or possibly roti. So Trinidad is known for roti. Trinidadian roti is not to be confused with Indian roti that you would get like from an Indian restaurant. It's a type of flatbread, and it does have the same name, but it's more along the lines, as far as the thinness and the flexibility of it, it's more along the lines of a tortilla, but not doughy like that. So roti definitely has an Indian influence, but Trinidad has made it its very own. So there's two types that are really popular. Dal puri, which is filled with chickpeas and still really thin like a tortilla. It's amazing to watch somebody do it. Busapshut or paratha, which is a type of roti that's made on the tawa. It's a tawa's like a sheet of metal that's round, kind of like a metal plate that sits on top of the stove. It's made kind of the same way as the dal puri without the peas, but the dabla, which is kind of like a stick, instead of just using it to turn the roti, it's used to shake it and kind of beat it up until it breaks into kind of this amazing, fluffy, almost pastry-like greatness. It is so good. It's called busapshut, which is kind of loosely translated into bust up shirt. I don't know how else to explain it, but it's kind of like a ripped up t-shirt is what they would say that it's like. And you eat that with curry chicken, curry goat, curry chana, curry potatoes. You can have it with me. I like to eat it by itself or just break it up and dip it in. Sometimes we'll wrap it up like a burrito and wrap the curry inside of it. It just depends on where you're getting it from. If you're getting it from home, if somebody's making it for you from home, you can decide what you want to do with it. If you're buying it out on the street, sometimes they'll wrap it up for you so you can just kind of walk with it like a burrito. So there are many other local dishes like jira pork, sides that you can have like pumpkin. Soups are a big deal. The ones that I've had before, cow heel soup, corn soup, chicken foot soup. Now, chicken foot soup was something I never thought I would have, but it's really not bad. In America, you have dumplings in your soup. In Trinidad, there's dumplings that go in the soup that are called spinners. They're really easy to make, and my kids absolutely love them. Their greatest soup disappointment is to have their mouth fixed for a spinner and get a potato. It's almost amusing to watch. Another staple food is cricks. Trinidadian people will get very offended if you say it's just a cracker, because it's not. It's more of a hearty cracker that's made in Trinidad and Tobago. It's kind of a local food, and it's often eaten with preserves or cheese, and you have it with tea. For some people, it's a whole meal. A great roadside snack is a fruit called chenet or guinep. The fruit has a thick green skin, and then when you break it open, it's slippery inside with a large seed inside of that. So it's kind of like a grape in the middle, but it's slippery. So little kids have to eat it with supervision, because if you don't grip it properly with your teeth, the whole thing will slip down your throat, seed and all, and you'll probably choke on it. So it's a dangerous food, but it's very, very good. There's also some other snacks and candies that kids enjoy in Trinidad. My kids made a video about Trinidadian snacks and candy that has some names of the popular ones included. And it shows them tasting them, actually blindfolded, and giving some of their opinions. One that they didn't do was sugar cake. It's one of my favorites. Probably not great if you have diabetes or any kind of issues. You'll notice a lot of stuff is around sugar because of the sugarcane industry at one time. Sugar cake is something you can get at the beach. It's basically sugar and coconut. So at the beach, they have all kinds of great foods and stuff like that. But it's sugar and coconut, and they'll either put something called essence in it, food coloring, and sometimes vanilla extract. Another popular one is snow cone. And it's similar to here, but not exactly the same, because you'll have the syrups, you have the shaved ice, and then you have the syrup that you put on top of it, but then they put condensed milk on top of that. Now, I was kind of skeptical about how that was going to taste the first time I had it, but it's actually really, really good. And you can make it at home. It might be something for the cooking class that you all might want to to try because the kids really like it. But the only problem is if you have kids that can't have sugar, they can't have milk products, things like that, you probably won't be able to get the authentic taste. But it is a pretty easy project to do. I've done it before with my kids using sugar and Kool-Aid packets. You can buy the syrup if you want to, but there's a lot of chemicals. I mean, it's not like there's not a lot of chemicals in Kool-Aid, but you can use the Kool-Aid packets and sugar and kind of make your own at-home snow cone with condensed milk. So the meat that's usually eaten in Trinidad and Tobago, same as here, chicken, fish, goat, some beef. Of course, there's some people who are vegetarian for whatever reason, religious, personal. During a special hunting season that's actually regulated by the government, some people eat wild meat, which can be armadillo, agouti, which is kind of like a squirrel sort of a thing, manikou, that's like a possum, and other meats that people just kind of, just animals that people eat that aren't your traditional animals. This is a tradition that's more rooted in the indigenous culture, but many of the foods and snacks that you'll see in Trinidad showcase the different cultures kind of blended together. So just like in America, kids and some adults prefer to eat fast food than home food, like the food I was talking about before. And there are fast food restaurants everywhere to help satisfy that need. The most popular, in my opinion, is KFC. So in Trinidad, when I was probably about 16 or 17, I saw my first two-story KFC. It's like an institution there. KFC is a big deal. So you can get pretty much anything, Taco Bell, McDonald's, any of that stuff. But with all of the great traditional like home food that you could get, I don't know why you would want to, but people are super into it. Holidays. Some of the holidays are centered around religion because nearly 50% of the population is Christian. So many of the holidays are Christian holidays. Christmas is a super big deal, probably for Christians and non-Christians as well. But at Christmas time, families gather and they eat and hang out with each other, or lime as it's called, and gifts are exchanged. But there are other traditions that are more in the forefront. A lot of families choose to paint their fences and their homes at Christmas time because they know family will be visiting. New curtains are also a tradition as far as things that you do within your home. There's special music played at Christmas called parang that has the Spanish influence. We drink sorrel, which is made from a flour that is dried and then boiled, and then you add sugar and stuff like that. So it's kind of like iced tea, but not really. There's panchakrem, which is similar to eggnog. There's pastels, which is one of my all-time favorite Christmas foods. It's a cornmeal that's filled with ground meat, sometimes raisins or currants, and that's wrapped in banana leaves, and then you wrap that, fold it up in foil, and then you steam it. It takes hours and hours, sometimes all day. So if someone gives them to you, they really, really like you. So after Christmas on Boxing Day, you go and visit family and friends and stuff like that. And sometimes you'll get pastels. I remember going to different people's houses and they'll give you a pastel as you're leaving. The closest thing I can think of that you may have had is a tamale, but it's similar to it, but it's nothing like it at the same time. There's cornmeal, there's meat, and that's about the extent of it. Almost 20% of the population is Hindu, so there's many Hindu celebrations during the year. Diwali and Holi are the ones that most people know about. Diwali is the festival of lights, and this year it'll be in October. A lot of people come there for that. People celebrate by giving away food to friends and neighbors. They make lanterns that you might want to look into as a craft project for your campers. They might enjoy that. Kurma is a snack that's eaten around this time. The kids taste tested it in the video that I told you about a little bit earlier. I'll make sure that I have a link to that. I think last year at the camp, I remember seeing kurma on a table. I'm not sure what country they were studying because I didn't teach that year, but I pretty much remember seeing kurma on the table. It's something that is my eye's going to be drawn to it. So some of the older campers may be familiar with it from last year. The most famous event in Trinidad is Carnival. It has a pretty interesting history. It started with slaves that were making fun of their slave masters, and over the years it evolved into this huge festival and parade, or as they call it, mass, that's been duplicated throughout the world and throughout all the islands. You'll find Carnival in England, Canada. My cousin played mass in Australia. They have carnival in Japan. It's everywhere. So it's days of celebrations, creative costumes, music, dancing, concerts. Carnival is kind of overwhelming and difficult to describe because there's so much to it, but for the purposes of the camp, you may want to stick to crafts and steer clear of videos because most of the costumes, when you look them up on the internet, are not exactly modest. And neither is the dancing, so that may be a lot for some of the campers. You can look up something called old-time masks or traditional masks to see some of the more fun traditional mask characters. Not a lot of attention is given to old-time masks anymore because it's not as like bright and colorful and glittery, but it's still a good option to show the kids something a little different and more kid-friendly than the modern bead and feather carnival that, you know, the people might not be wearing a lot of clothing. There's lots of characters in old time masks. There's Devil, there's the Planter's Wife or Dame Lorraine. There's Barrakeet, which is a donkey costume made to look like a man is riding the donkey. That's always fun to see. There's Sailor, there's Moko Jumbi. Moko Jumbi is a good craft opportunity and a video opportunity as well. Moko Jumbi dolls can be made with chopsticks, small wooden rods, or cut skewers for the stilts, and pipe cleaners so you can make bendable bodies. You can also show the kids Moko Jumbi dancers in video. They dance in beautiful costumes and they're on stilts. It's pretty amazing to watch. When the kids are young, they learn on short stilts, but as they become older and more skilled, they're able to walk on stilts that are taller than they are. It's pretty amazing to watch, and I'll include a link for you guys to take a look at what that looks like as well. Another craft project you can do is making a carnival headpiece if you're more drawn to the bead and feather type carnival. It can get messy because you might need hot glue, so you would do that probably for the older kids. I do have, and there's a tutorial for that, I'll give you the link for that. There's a paper version of the carnival crown that I can share the download link for as well, and I might just, you know, send the printables over so that everybody can have an opportunity to get it. Another thing that originated in Trinidad is limbo. That's something that we claim. So one of the really cool things, I don't know if you all have, you can have the kids do limbo. That's really easy. It's, you know, I guess you'd have to be careful because you don't want a kid to fall back and crack his head open on the ground. You got to be careful when you're dealing with other people's kids. But limbo is, you know, just the stick, and then you kind of try to work your way under the stick. There's some really great videos. There's a Trinidadian woman, a young lady who's really, really good at it. She gets within inches of the floor. It's very, very cool to watch. So that might be an activity opportunity for your older, more well-balanced campers, the campers that have more balance. Okay? So Trinidad and Tobago has a high literacy rate, and the education system follows something similar to the British system as far as promotion and the testing that's done at each level to determine what school students will advance to and whether or not they'll attend college. The books used in the schools, however, are country specific, so it's not all British books that they're learning from. There are private and public schools, just like here, and public education is free for primary and secondary school if a student goes to a public school. There's universities available to attend. The largest is the University of the West Indies, or UWI, and the government also provides tuition assistance for those who do well and want to move on to university. So now we'll talk about interesting sites, popular music, popular figures. One of my favorite places to visit when I was there last was Pitch Lake. Pitch Lake is the largest natural deposit of asphalt in the world. So when you get there, it smells. It's not great, but it smells. The ground is black from the pitch, but there's beautiful plants and flowers everywhere, and there's lots of water. You'll see people actually bathing in the water. I've added a link that includes photos and you can look up some videos of Pitch Lake as well. It's really, really interesting to see, and your campers might get a kick out of those. The Caroni Bird Sanctuary, also known as Caroni Swamp, is another great place to check out. That's where you can see the national bird. They have boat tours and everything. There's lots of videos on YouTube of people going to visit the bird sanctuary, people touring the swamp. There are lots of wonderful beaches and waterfalls as well. Each one has its own character. Some are more for tourists, more tourist friendly and easier to get to. Like you can just get to it by car, just drive up and go to the beach. One that I like to go to was Toko, but others you'll have to hike to. If you want to see the waterfalls and all the really great natural wonders, you'd have to hike to it, but it's really worth it. Figures who are from Trinidad and Tobago or who have Trinidad and Tobago heritage that your campers might recognize. Winston Duke from Black Panther is from Tobago. Anya Ayungchi is from Trinidad and Tobago, and she's from Project Runway. Calypso Rose performed at Coachella this year. Alfonso Ribeiro is host of America's Funniest Home Videos. Some of you, the kids might play Fortnite and they know the Carlton dance. That's something that he came up with. Sloane Stevens is a tennis player. She won the US Open 2 years ago in 2017. Cardi B, everybody knows who she is, but you may not want to go into that. Maybe the older groups, I don't know. The kids might know some of them, they may not. Stokely Carmichael is more of a historical figure. He was prominent in the American Civil Rights Movement. There's a lot to know about Stokely Carmichael, and you can choose to do a lesson on him for the older students, but it's a lot to know. He was born in Trinidad, raised in the U.S. from the time he was 2. He attended Howard University, and so that might resonate with some local children whose parents might work there, or they might want to go to school there later. Music. All kinds of music is played and listened to in Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad is known for being the birthplace of the steel pan or the steel drum. We talked earlier about oil production being a big deal in Trinidad. So years and years ago, local youth created a steel pan out of discarded oil drums. And musicians on the island perfected it into the instrument that is played all over the world today. Most people associate the steel drum with the Caribbean in general, or more specifically Jamaica, but Trinidad and Tobago is where the instrument actually originated. Calypso is another type of music that's popular in Trinidad, especially during carnival time. Calypso is a type of music that is often used to discuss political matters, current events. Calypso Rose, I talked about her a few minutes ago. She's a popular Calypsonian and activist who was recently a featured performer at Coachella alongside acts like Jaden Smith and Ariana Grande. So, you know, Calypso is not old and dead and gone. It's something that's still important and popular today. Soca is an offshoot of Calypso that became popular in the 1980s. Current soca tunes are not always child-friendly. As a matter of fact, most of them are not. And some older music has a lot of double entendre that would make having kids sing it a little uncomfortable for adults. So I have a child-friendly soca list on my YouTube channel. I'll provide a link to that. Make sure you listen to the lyrics before you just let it play. You got to be careful. A good popular song that the kids can use for presentations that was really, really good and popular this year is called Savannah Grass by Kes the Band. There are some themes that you may not want to deal with that are common in soca music, like drinking and sex and whining, and it's pretty prevalent in soca music, especially today. But soca music is also the most energetic and fun for the kids to listen to. So there is clean music, but you have to look for it. So choose carefully and listen to it completely before you make a playlist. Some people refuse to listen to soca outside of Carnival, but with Carnival happening all over the world, all year round, it's becoming a more mainstream genre of music. So it's not too difficult to find on Spotify, iTunes. Now we'll talk about folklore. There's a lot of folklore characters, but to be honest, many of them are very scary. So maybe not to kids these days, but they were to me when I was growing up. So there's characters like the Duendes, who are the souls of children who died before they could be baptized. So that sounds scary. There's Duppies that are ghosts, Jumbies, Laja Bless. There's none of it is particularly child friendly, at least not to me. The least scary is Anansi. He's a trickster that's similar to Brer Rabbit. And there's many books available for story time for younger campers. Some games that you might want to play with your campers outside can be found online. I'll include a link to a list of those games. Some of them are a lot of fun. One game that my mom taught me, or a song that my mom taught me when I was growing up, was Brown Girl in the Ring. So that's the song and the game. So even the Wiggles sing it. I know some of you remember the Wiggles. So you can find the song online with the Wiggles singing it. You can find, more of a Caribbean feel singing it. And you can teach the campers the younger campers might enjoy it. Sports. The most popular sports are cricket, track and field, and soccer, better known as football. Netball is also popular with women. It's similar to basketball. So I think I covered everything, or at least gave you a good starting place and some keywords for you to use for your research so that you can create your lesson plans. I'll send links and principles for you to use with your campers as well. I hope that you have a fantastic week. I was really kind of bummed that I couldn't teach for Trinidad and Tobago week. It was like I had been waiting for this particular week for years, and just when it's time, when it happens, I'm not available to teach. But I know all you guys will knock it out of the park and make it a great week for the campers. Thank you for hanging out with me for all of this. I hope it's not a full hour, because that's a lot, but I hope you have a wonderful summer. Take care.